Today we are in the State House cafeteria highlighting the new show here for the month of March. It is a show that comes every 2 or 3 years here, done by the Vermont Art Teachers Association. Pieces of artwork from students elementary school through high school from all over the state of Vermont. The theme this year is Earth. Student images celebrating our stewardship of the natural world for Youth Art Month here. And this show actually is partnered with Green Up Vermont, who is celebrating their 50th anniversary. So they've got a display in the back part where the granite wall is here in the cafeteria that's definitely worth a look. That kind of is the highlight and a bit of a visual timeline of the last 50 years of Green Up Vermont. And then the rest of the cafeteria, this show always fills out a lot of the cafeteria in all kinds of different spaces. The art teachers always take full advantage of all the white space and the glass and all the nooks and crannies here to really fill things out with student art. This show, to give you a sense of the show, from the Vermont Art Teachers Association, they say that visual arts communicate ideas and express emotions in unique and powerful ways, as exhibited in these works of art by Vermont's pre-K through grade 12 students. Data suggests our current generation of art students are passionate and committed to a wide range of social justice issues, perhaps none as powerful as their commitment to the natural world. They're continuing in the Vermont ethos that initiated Green Up Day in our state 50 years ago, as well as climate initiatives that are being brought up in legislation this session. And each age group here sort of did different things in terms of what they're looking at. The kindergarten students who researched and created Vermont's threatened species out of clay. They've had 3rd and 4th graders who've given a voice to other species through realistic animal portraits. And all of these pieces fit into Vermont's art education standards as well by understanding art has intent and meaning. High school photography students have some great work in here where they've been have created environmental memes and are doing the same as they synthesize and relate their personal experiences and knowledge and sort of planning, creating, and presenting the pieces of art that are on display here. Vermont Art Education, the Art Teachers Association notes, programs are vibrant, committed to providing students the skills they need to add their voices to a vital democracy, and they're going to be having a reception here on Tuesday, March 31st at the end of the month from 5 to 7 p.m. So would certainly encourage folks who are in the State House or are passing by to stop in and check this exhibit out. It really is, as these shows always are, a wide range of levels of art, again from pre-K students all the way through seniors. There are photographic pieces, there are painted pieces, there are three-dimensional pieces, all highlighting the importance of protecting our planet here, as well as the tie-in, which is really wonderful with the 50th anniversary of Green Up Day. So if you're here, pop in, take a few minutes, walk around, appreciate the work that these young people have done, and if you happen to be here or looking for something to do in the late afternoon or early evening on March 31st, stop by for the reception.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. My name is Duval, Executive Director of the Energy Action Network. It is a great pleasure to share with the legislature, the administration, our network members, and the media EAN's latest annual progress report for Vermont with a focus on energy, emissions, the economy, and equity. First, let me say a brief word about EAN. Our network is made up of a diversity of businesses, nonprofits, utilities, colleges and universities, and public partners, over 200 in total across the state of Vermont. The mission of this network is to achieve Vermont's comprehensive energy plan goals, including a 90% renewable by 2050 total energy commitment, and to significantly reduce greenhouse gases in ways that create a more just, thriving, and sustainable future for Vermonters. To serve and support this diverse network, a small nonprofit organization exists to serve a couple of key roles. One, we serve as a neutral convener of that diverse network. To respect the many opinions across the network, EAN, the nonprofit, does not lobby for particular bills. Second, we work with public partners from the local to the state to the federal level to collect data and track progress toward Vermont's energy and climate commitments. We conduct analysis about the challenges and opportunities of meeting them, and we share independent and objective information and analysis primarily through this annual progress report. Our aim is to both ground and advance Vermont's energy and climate conversation with data and evidence. This report is a major undertaking that is only possible thanks to the good work and close collaboration of network members and public partners. So before I review the highlights of the report, I want to pause to say some very important thank yous. First, I want to thank EAN's network manager, Carolyn Wesley. And if I mention your name, please raise your hand so other folks can see you. Carolyn has managed the production of this report from start to finish. Pamela Hathaway, who is EAN's energy research analyst, and Lee Seddon, who is EAN's president and one of our senior fellows who led a lot of the energy analysis in this report. I also see many of our public partners here today, without whom this report would not be possible. I saw Deputy Commissioner Riley Allen from the Public Service Department, Andrew Perchlik. That whole team there has been incredible in terms of providing information and collaborating on the analysis. From the Agency of Natural Resources, Commissioner Peter Walk at the Department of Environmental Conservation, his team. I see Colin Smythe here, who leads the state's emissions inventory. The Agency of Commerce and Community Development, especially Ken Jones, the economic research analyst there, partners at VTrans, and more. Also want to thank VEIC, the Vermont Energy Investment Corporation, for their close partnership on information and gathering and analysis. I'm really pleased to have Rebecca Foster, the Director of Efficiency Vermont, here with us today, and many other folks from that team, including Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont, and Adam Sherman from the Biomass Energy Resource Center also provided important information for this report. Also the University of Vermont and the Transportation Research Center. With that, without further delay, is a summary of the findings in this year's report. First and most importantly, the transition off fossil fuels is an economic development and affordability strategy for Vermont. This topic is particularly important to me personally. Before I led EAN, I served as Economic Development Director at the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And one of the things that I've noticed is that the economic conversation about energy for too long has been backwards. Often the question will be asked, how much will it cost us to move from fossil fuel to efficient and renewable energy use? This report shows that there are three key questions we should be asking instead. Number one, how much is our fossil fuel dependence currently costing Vermonters in the Vermont economy? Number two, how much do Vermonters stand to save on energy costs as a result of this transition? And number three, how will the Vermont economy be affected by a transition off of fossil fuels? To answer this question, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development conducted an independent economic impact analysis of EAN's Path to Paris model. The Path to Paris model takes proven and available technologies and best practices as outlined in Vermont's Comprehensive Energy Plan and models the scale and pace of efficient and renewable energy adoption, primarily for how we get around and heat our homes and buildings, that will be necessary to meet Vermont's commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement. What ACCD found is that if we meet our Paris commitment in this way, it is estimated that we will keep more money in state and more money in Vermonters' pockets. Specifically, ACCD estimates that we can reduce the net amount of dollars draining out of the Vermont economy by over $1.1 billion, increase net investment in in-state businesses by over $300 million, and save Vermont consumers nearly $800 million between 2020 and 2035. This analysis, by ACCD's own admission, is very conservative. For instance, it does not include the value of state incentives in the consumer savings calculations, which can result in significant additional savings for Vermonters who do weatherization projects or install renewable heating systems like advanced wood heat or cold climate heat pumps or heat pump water heaters. It also projects electric vehicle prices to stay at their current levels for the next 5 years, even though we know that battery prices and EV prices are decreasing every year. It also projects fossil fuel prices to stay at their current levels, which are historically low, about $2.50 a gallon compared to the history, which we have a graph on, which I'll show momentarily. Furthermore, it does not account for price decreases that are expected for clean technologies due to increasing economies of scale or further technological improvements. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the analysis does not account for the very real costs of climate disruption, or what some refer to as the social cost of carbon. But it does account for some important things, and let me state those numbers again. Reducing the flow of dollars out of the Vermont economy by over $1.1 billion, increasing investment in Vermont-based businesses by over $300 million, and achieving net consumer savings for Vermonters of nearly $800 million. The reasons for this very good economic news lie in two key differences between fossil fuels versus the more efficient and renewable energy alternatives. First, as you can see here, Vermont has averaged over the last 10 years about $2 billion a year in fossil fuel spending. And about 3/4 of that, $1.5 billion a year, drains right out of our state economy. That's only 25 cents of every dollar spent on fossil fuels staying in Vermont. All of the efficient and renewable alternatives keep much more of our energy dollars local. 60 cents of every dollar invested in weatherization, 62 cents of every dollar we spend on electricity, and 80 cents of every dollar we spend on wood stay local, support jobs for our neighbors, and strengthen the Vermont economy. We understand the benefits of buy local in our agriculture and food sector, and the same is true when it comes to energy. The second reason is that fossil fuels are just more expensive and have more volatile prices than electricity and renewable fuels. You see in the top left the prices of gasoline and diesel since 2005 versus the equivalent cost of charging an electric vehicle. Down here you see a comparison of the cost to heat your home and building, with the highest cost, most price volatile options being propane and fuel oil. The lowest cost way to get around or to heat your home or building is with the most stable and predictable prices is either with electricity or with wood heat. We have proven available and cost-effective solutions to reduce climate pollution and save Vermonters money from transportation and heating. No matter where you live in Vermont, and no matter what type of home or building you're trying to heat, there is an efficient and renewably sourced heating technology that can work for you right now. And there are about 36 electric vehicle models currently available in Vermont, including 10 all-wheel drive options, soon to include pickups. Let's look at what this could mean for an individual household in Vermont. Specifically, for a Vermonter who buys or leases a new electric vehicle instead of a new fossil fuel vehicle, who installs a multi-head cold climate heat pump system to displace 3/4 of their fossil fuel use, and who installs a heat pump water heater to replace an old electric water heater, ACCD projects the savings over 10 years, to be nearly $10,000 combined from those three actions. Now, of course, individual savings will vary household by household based on the investments made and actions taken. But there is the potential for these savings to be significant, especially as prices of clean technologies continue to decline, and when utility and state incentives are added to those totals. Of course, though, not everyone can afford the upfront investment of a new vehicle or a heating system, and that's where additional state policy and incentives will have to come in if we are to have an equitable energy transition. To have a total or a comprehensive energy conversation, it's helpful to remember that while solar, wind, and hydroelectricity generation technology have been around for decades, the solutions for how we get around and heat our homes and buildings efficiently without fossil fuels are newer. A big part of this transition will be making sure that Vermonters are aware of cleaner, healthier, and more economical ways to get around and heat their homes and buildings. For instance, a decade ago, there were fewer than 100 electric vehicles in Vermont and no cold climate heat pumps. As of last year, there are over 3,500 electric vehicles registered in Vermont, over 17,000 heat pump systems, and over 11,000 heat pump water heaters. Those numbers are growing every year and could be the beginnings of a wholesale market transformation, similar to when cell phones replaced landlines and what we saw here in state with the growth of solar PV. But the key question is one of the key questions about whether that will happen is whether or not we put the policies in place to support their adoption and send the right market signals. Additionally, this report, for the first time, includes a comparison of greenhouse gas emissions from every state in New England, plus New York and our neighbors in the north of Quebec. What we found is that Vermont is the only state in the region that has failed to reduce its emissions below 1990 levels. Vermont has made the least progress toward the Paris climate commitment of any state in the region, and Vermont has the highest emissions per capita of any state in the region, at over 15 tons of greenhouse gas emissions per person. Why is this happening? One big reason is the increase in our transportation emissions since 1990. There are also more vehicle miles traveled in Vermont than any state in the region. These numbers have continued to go up every year since 2014, and the number is almost 12,000 miles per year now. And we're not getting the full benefit of a more efficient vehicle fleet because Vermonters are buying bigger and bigger vehicles. In 2012, 55% of new vehicles purchased in Vermont were SUVs or pickup trucks. Last year, 80% of vehicles were SUVs or pickup trucks. As of 2016, Vermont's emissions from electricity were only 8% of the statewide total, while emissions from transportation and thermal energy use were over 70% of our climate pollution. More recently, the 2018 data actually shows that the emissions from electricity generation in Vermont are only 2% of the statewide total. And yes, while we have achieved real and important emissions reduction from the electricity sector, and can still make more, they have been dwarfed by the increases in emissions from transportation and how we heat our homes and buildings. While we can do more, the progress we have already made in our electricity sector is impressive, and it represents a strong foundation for further progress. Thanks to the Renewable Energy Standard, passed in 2015, Vermont has cut its emissions from electricity over 80% between 2015 and 2018. And this will get us about 1/4 of the way to Vermont's Paris commitment. As a result of that Renewable Energy Standard, Vermont now has the lowest emitting electricity sector in the entire country, both overall and per capita. What having the cleanest electricity in the country means is that whenever we electrify how we heat our homes with heat pump water heaters or cold climate heat pumps, or how we get around with electric vehicles, we get a greater emissions reduction benefit than anywhere else in the United States. While EAN's path to Paris may sound like a big lift, looked at another way, it's not asking very much at all. All we have to do to meet this commitment is to get our per capita emissions down to that of New Hampshire over the next 5 years. That means each Vermonter, on average, reducing our climate pollution by 4 tons per year. It's really quite simple. Fossil fuels are the problem, and each of us has to do what we can to stop creating new demand for them, especially because electric and renewable alternatives are proven, ready, and available. Most Vermonters I know don't like using gasoline or diesel or fuel oil or propane. They simply do so because that's what the vehicles they have run on or what the heating system they have requires them to use to stay warm. To reduce fossil fuel use, then, part of the solution is helping make sure that we transition out the equipment, the vehicles and heating systems that lead to fossil fuel use in the first place, by focusing on the point of purchase. Once those vehicles, heating systems, and pieces of equipment are ready to be replaced, we can avoid decades of further fossil fuel pollution and cost. If you are a Vermonter concerned about the climate, doing your part, and not being exposed to the relatively high and volatile prices of fossil fuels, here's a commitment you can make to help do that. Never buy a new fossil-fueled vehicle again. Never install a new fossil-fueled heating system again. Never purchase anything new that uses fossil fuels again. Most Vermonters just don't need to, given the proliferation of working, affordable electric and renewable alternatives for everything from vehicles to efficient heating to lawn care. Vermont simply cannot afford new vehicles, new heating systems, and other fossil-fueled equipment that will lock in continued use of fossil fuels for decades. It's a consumer protection issue, and it's an environmental issue, and it's a health issue. and Vermonters cannot afford the high and volatile prices of those fuels or of being stuck with stranded assets. For those Vermonters with fewer means, it is the responsibility of our government to ensure a progressive and equitable transition with incentives to help, so that the economic gains, the $800 million in consumer savings I mentioned earlier, don't just go to well-off Vermonters, leaving the rest of us exposed to high and volatile fuel prices. This transition is not a sacrifice. It is an opportunity with great economic benefit for both individual Vermonters and the state economy. The efficient and renewable alternatives, from electric vehicles to cold climate heat pumps and advanced wood heating systems, are cleaner. They have lower lifetime costs and do far more to keep dollars local and grow the Vermont economy. This year, we have also included policy case studies from across the world of places that have been the most successful at reducing emissions while improving their economy. Norway stands out for driving down emissions from their transportation sector, the sector we have had the most difficulty with. They have done so by passing a law requiring that all passenger vehicles sold after 2025 be zero emissions, effectively banning the sale of fossil fuel vehicles after 2025 in the passenger vehicle fleet. They've put a fee on the purchase of new fossil fuel vehicles between now and 2025 to account for the social and environmental cost of the pollution they create. And using that revenue, they are providing incentives for electric vehicle purchases. Together, these policies, along with other complementary policies, have already led to the majority of new vehicle sales in Norway being electric as of 2018. The approach of setting a future date certain, past which old and dangerous technologies that are hazardous to human health and the environment, dates after which they will be banned, as Norway has done with their phase out of fossil fuel vehicles by 2025, is not new. The United States has taken a similar approach to substances like lead and asbestos. The difference is that fossil-fueled vehicles, heating systems, and other pieces of equipment are not just detrimental to human health, they are destabilizing the entire climate on which we depend. In summary, we have the technology to move toward ending fossil fuel use and to do so in a way that brings economic benefit to all Vermonters. But this transformation will not happen without a comprehensive energy policy and regulatory framework that also requires emissions reduction from the transportation and thermal sectors, where over 70% of Vermont's climate pollution comes from, and where 80% of our energy costs come from. And this transition will not be equitable without state incentives and assistance to ensure that the economic savings and health benefits of getting off of fossil fuels don't just accrue to upper income Vermonters. As Upper Austria, Norway, Quebec, California, and every other country, province, and state that we have studied has learned, pairing emissions reduction with economic improvement requires both sticks and carrots, both regulations and incentives. And it requires doing so across all energy sectors, not just electricity. To sum up, in addition to the new analysis and findings I've summarized here, the report also includes the official tracking information that our network members, public partners, and the media have come to expect and rely on from EAN reports. You will find all of this in the printed reports on the table, which are available for you here today for legislators that are already in your mailboxes. Or if you'd like to access it online, in addition to other resources like downloadable infographics of the images you've seen, please visit eanvt.org. It is now my pleasure to introduce Senate President Tim Ashe. Senator, thank you for your engagement with and commitment to finding ways to make progress on these important issues.
That we formally congratulate Jared for his very, very My reputation in this building is not for giving easy quarter to those who come before legislative committees, despite the fact that my favorite character on Leave It to Beaver was Eddie Haskell. And so I just want to say that one of the things I've really appreciated about Jared and EAN more generally is that those of us who are policy wonks and energy geeks and people who are climate change activists, we tend to speak in certain ways that are precise, but don't always communicate beyond the circles that we're comfortable working with and communicating with. And what I find so remarkable about Jared in particular, and the presentation that he and the partner organizations assemble, is it's able to cut through a lot of the technical jargon and really highlight what's at the root of it, that we can save the planet while saving money and growing the economy. And I think that Jared, more than anyone in the state, has really been able to communicate that, so I'm so grateful to him for that. I'll be fairly brief, but want to say that Jared's presentation concluded by several references to the importance of equity in these discussions. And I'll confess that as recently as a few months ago, I kept hearing people start throwing equity on the table. And I was assured that the only reason it's the shortest bar here is because it's the letters that happen to be in the word. It's not that it's getting short shrift. But to me, equity is so critical because we cannot clearly count on just those who buy electric cars to do their part to save the planet. It is going to require us to enlist all of the people who maybe haven't had the luxury of thinking about climate change because they're too busy trying to put food on the table, get their kids to school, and everything else that makes life challenging, especially if you don't have much money. And yet it's precisely the behavior of a whole cross-section of society that's going to be required if we're going to really meet these goals, which may very well soon be requirements. I can tell you from personal experience in the affordable housing sector, back in 2010, 2011, I was very glad to be the project manager of one of the state's largest weatherization projects in history, which was 3 Cathedral Square in downtown Burlington. For those of you who can imagine it, it's a tall fortress looking like 10-story building. And with the changes we were able to make there, we were able almost overnight to reduce the natural gas consumption by 40% per year. That money was then able to be recycled back into Cathedral Square's operations to provide needed health services and supports for seniors who very much needed it, to be able to use for transportation to help people to get to medical appointments and so on. So it speaks to the broader economic benefits of cutting down unnecessary fossil fuel consumption. One of the other things that I think EAN and this report doubles down on is the notion that while we have made amazing strides in the electricity sector, transportation and heating efficiency remain areas with a lot of desperately needed work ahead of us. So I'll talk briefly about a few things that are working their way through the Senate. I won't focus on the House other than to say that they, just before break, passed the Global Warming Solutions Act, which is now on its way over to the Senate, where after our crossover date will get taken up. Right now in our Senate Finance Committee, they have just completed work on S-267. This bill does 2 primary things. First, it accelerates the date by which our utilities will be required to provide 100% renewable electricity, and at the same time requires that an increasing share of that electricity be produced here in state. Now, we believe that is important both to clean up our electric profile. It also continues to build on Vermont's renewable energy sector. We know that we have seen the decline in some clean energy jobs in Vermont, and I think that it's about time we start talking about that job loss the same way we would if any other company left the state. Second, we are continuing the work, partnering with Efficiency Vermont and others, of modernizing the Efficiency Vermont model to focus more on the concept of an all-fuels efficiency utility. As we know, thanks to the investments over many years now, both Efficiency Vermont and Burlington Electric have done amazing work in reducing unnecessary electric consumption. The challenge has been that there are some limitations on what they've been able to do when they go into people's homes and businesses. They're able to focus on some energy uses and not others. We know this is a complicated regulatory transition, but increasingly we know that we need those technical experts when they're in a home to be able to move people's heating and other energy uses towards cleaner electricity, especially when it's moving away from fossil fuels. And then third, this speaks to the transportation issue. Later this week, I anticipate the Senate, possibly on Friday, will be voting on an amendment on the Senate floor about the manner in which Vermont would choose to participate in the Transportation and Climate Initiative. That initiative, which has been spearheaded by Governor Baker in Massachusetts, has had 12 states and Washington, D.C. coming together to think about how regionally we can make a big dent in transportation emissions and produce revenues at the same time that states like Vermont could then expend to make great improvements in the transportation sector. What might those investments in Vermont look like? It could be furthering the idea that's being explored right here in Montpelier with microtransit. It could be replacing the soon-to-expire Volkswagen settlement funds in ways to be used for charging infrastructure and other support as the vehicle fleet moves more in the electric direction. And I also want to say that this issue of equity when it comes to transportation is so critical, because we know that it is the people who have the least who will pay the most in order to get to work and do all the things they have to do unless we're able to help with different interventions. Just, I believe, yesterday or the day before, I'm very pleased to have received the email from our Agency of Transportation saying that the program that's being managed by Capstone here in central Vermont to provide high-efficiency vehicles for people who are income eligible throughout the state has just gone, the green light has just gone on, so people across the state who are income eligible will be able to get into hybrids, used hybrids, and other high-efficiency vehicles. That is on top of the program also being run through the state and our utilities to provide a cash incentive for the first time, straight from the state of Vermont, for electric plug-in vehicles. So we obviously have a tremendous amount of work to do, and I guess I'll close in one thing. Sometimes when Jared's speaking, I feel full of optimism and light. Then he turns to a new slide, and I start sinking back into myself, and I think, oh gosh, how are we going to pull this off? But I think it is worth acknowledging something that's very real. For many years, Vermont was considered a leader when it came to taking on climate change and doing the right thing in terms of our energy future. The focus had been on electric efficiency and moving towards renewable electricity. And in those regards, we truly have been national leaders. Not to rest on our laurels, we have to always evolve, but we were national leaders. Many legislators went home feeling very sound in their sleep at night, saying, we're doing everything right, other states keep telling us they're modeling after us. The more we have learned in recent years about the source of our emissions, the state of the planet, it has required us to take a collective step back and acknowledge that our almost unilateral or exclusive focus on electricity was missing the mark with two other major sources of harmful emissions. And so sometimes people will say, oh, in light of this chart, how come we don't have a plan to fix it all tomorrow? But what we're really doing is taking an entire economy that was built in one way and saying it's time to start moving it another way. And it is our commitment on the Senate side, and I know with the Speaker in the House, that we will be doing everything we can to manage that process so that we have the clean energy future that Jared has so articulately explained the need to get to. So thank you so much for the partnership, and I can't say enough about the common vision that I think all the partners have. Of course, figuring out how to do it is always the difficult part, but I'm pretty sure we're going to make very, very good progress this year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dick McCormack. I represent the Windsor County Senate District. I serve on the Senate Health and Welfare Committee and the Appropriations Committee. And by the time people see this, the coronavirus may be a real problem, I mean a serious problem, and the fact that I'm fairly confident in our ability to weather it will appear naive and irresponsible, or people will be saying, oh my God, he's making such a big deal over nothing. Well, at this point, we don't know. And I think the general approach at its best is this: hope for the best. Expect the most probable, prepare for the worst. And preparing for the worst doesn't mean you run around saying, we're all going to die, we're all going to die. You're not panicking. And the one thing you don't want to have is panic. But that you do recognize realistically there's at least a possibility of this getting to be really, really ugly, and we should be ready for that. But what we're really expecting is that we're going to have a flu epidemic. A lot of people are going to feel real miserable for a few days, and some people who are vulnerable are in danger, their lives are in danger, and that's probably what we most have to focus on. We're getting used to this elbow thing here in the State House. It's typically one person will extend his or her hand, and the other person will say, no, 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 elbow, and it's sort of a game. And I think people will get used to it eventually. It will be like seatbelts. And maybe it'll stick around. I don't know. I serve on the Health and Welfare Committee, so we are looking at that. It has been town meeting week was last week. I got around to as many towns as I could. Unfortunately, I have 26 towns. Any town I don't get to, they think I've gotten lazy and complacent and I don't care about them. Any town I do get to, they think, well, wish the politician would shut up so we can take care of town business. But in any case, it's always good to get out and see people. One thing is that years ago I worked for NBC, and their formula was every positive communication from the public represented, about 500 to 1,000 people who thought the same way. They liked the show, they just didn't take the trouble to send a letter. Every negative represented maybe 50, because people are much more likely to write when they're angry. That's the case in politics as well. As we get into the late session, which we're about halfway through now, people start to get in touch when there's stuff going on they don't like. And I would suggest to people, if they're opposed to a piece of legislation and you want your legislator to know it, talk about the legislation that you don't like, rather than scolding the legislator for his lying disregard for the public good and his contempt for his own constituents. Because scolding someone, it's called an ad hominem argument, which is to say not addressing the issue but addressing the person. It's insulting, it's often undeserved, and mainly it's not particularly persuasive. When I get an email, that says, "Why are you trying to ruin life in Vermont?" I think, oh, okay, well, that'll change. Okay, I was going to vote for the bill, but now I'll vote against it. Because the guy insulted me. He must be right. So, meanwhile, not everybody writes nasty personal attacks. And the arguments that come in against a bill where it is on point, even if I don't agree with some, what I used to say to my kids and my students was, it is possible for a person to be wrong without being evil, stupid, or crazy. And so it is possible to argue with people with whom you disagree, but who may or may not have a point. And I am actually persuadable. There was one bill that I expected to support that I've been hearing some arguments about, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe I don't need to support this. So in any case, we're coming up on what's called crossover. I'm talking on the Wednesday after town meeting week, and this Friday is crossover, which means Senate bills have to be out of their committee of jurisdiction and ready for a vote to be sent to the House by this Friday. House bills have to be out of their committee of jurisdiction and ready for a vote by this Friday. Bills that are in the money committees can get another extra week. And the idea is to just keep things moving along. It helps when you have a deadline. We are getting from the House the Act 250 bill, the climate bill, some really important pieces of legislation. And we're getting ready now. So our roles change. We go from creators of legislation to skeptical critics of legislation, and we kind of figure out whether or not we think the other house has done a good job. In my other life, I am a folk musician, and I got to get away here because I'm going to get on the phone, because today I'm buying myself a diatonic auto harp. So I'll see you. Bye-bye.
Hi, I'm Representative Mary Morrissey from Bennington, and I'm here with Jonah Spivak and a group that has come to the Vermont State House today to speak on the creation of the 250th anniversary for the state's celebration coming up in 2027. This would be creating a commission that would look into planning for this event, and so I'll turn it over to Jonah as to explain kind of what the day's been like today.
Oh, thank you very much, Mary. Not used to this kind of technology, so you have to bear with me. But the fact is, 242 years ago or so, Vermont made history. Vermont became an independent republic, the first constitution to outlaw slavery, and we didn't just do it in a casual way, we did it when we were under fire. Vermont had been invaded. Burgoyne and the British, the world's superpower at that time, was literally at our doors. And in fact, they had chased us from Fort Ticonderoga. We did a valiant rearguard action in Hubbardton. But 2 days later, after the attack in Hubbardton, we were signing our Constitution for the state of Vermont. And I do say state. We would not be officially recognized as a state for another 14 years. But in the interim, we were a republic, and we were literally forged in fire, culminating in the Battle of Bennington, which was arguably a turning point in the American Revolution. So what we're trying to do now is start the work to plan for these celebrations that will be happening, as Mary said, in 2027. But it's a little more than that because, in fact, the year before, 2026, will also be the 250th anniversary of our country, of the Declaration of Independence, an absolutely vital period in our history, a time that will, I think, understandably instill a strong sense of patriotism and interest in colonial history around that. So we really need to be thinking about 2026 as well. But yes, there's more, because in fact we would be remiss not to also think about 2025. Because in 1775 is when Ethan Allen and the Green Mountain Boys took Fort Ticonderoga, one of the most significant early victories in the American Revolution. So in addition to our federal celebration in 2026, Vermont has a unique position to celebrate that history, our national history, but as well as Vermont's history, at a time when Vermont history literally became not just national history, but international history. So that's our goal here today. We have been fortunate to have a lot of support from delegates from both sides of the aisle, from all around the state of Vermont. These are all people who are very interested in our Vermont history, and together we'll be hopefully creating this commission this legislative session so we can get to work this fall.
Great. And what other components would you like to see added to this, like such as education and other parts?
Well, Mary, you named an absolutely critical one. Education is a key component of this. More than anything else, I think we want to include the Department of Education in this planning work so that our students get to understand and appreciate this history. Not only is it useful for them as being good citizens, but it's interesting stuff. This is the kind of stories that gets people excited about our history, that makes them want to stay in Vermont to raise their families when they get older, or if they go out for colleges, as I did, they want to come back because of that. So that sense of place that we get through education, vitally important. I would also mention we are somewhat of a tourist economy. This is good for tourism. When we had our celebrations in 1891, sitting President Benjamin Harrison came to Bennington to celebrate our day with us, and he said at that time, what school child today does not know the story of John Stark and the Battle of Bennington? Well, I would argue today, not as many as we would like. So the work needs to be done. There's an educational component. There's certainly a tourism component. But most importantly, this is for ourselves. We need to understand and appreciate our own history so that we can carry it forward in a responsible way.
Right. And again, it's important to note that this is a statewide celebration. So we're looking to plan, or the commission is looking to plan events across the state to celebrate this wonderful event.
I'm so grateful you pointed that out, because it is easy because of the Battle Monument and the Battle of Bennington. We say Bennington frequently, but it truly is only a small component of this statewide celebration that really begins in January in Westminster with the signing of our Vermont Declaration of Independence, continuing through that very fateful year in 1777 with the Battle of Hubbardton, which we mentioned, with the signing of the Constitution, with the occupation of Castleton. So all parts of the state play an important role in this, and we want to make sure everyone's included.
We thank you for your time today, and we hope you'll all be a part of this wonderful celebration.
Thank you.